You never really know how far the HOA will go until they cross the wrong family. Willow Creek was supposed to be paradise. Perfect lawns, white fences, neighbors who waved like clockwork. And then there was Karen Davenbrook, the self-proclaimed queen of this suburban kingdom. Red blazer, clipboard in hand, and a permanent frown that could curdle milk. My name's Ethan Cole. On paper, I'm just a quiet software engineer who keeps his lawn trimmed and pays his dues on time. What no one knows is that I've spent the last 3 years living under deep cover for the FBI. My job was to monitor suspicious money movements buried inside suburban HOAs across the state. And I was doing just fine until Karen decided to trip my 6 months pregnant wife on the sidewalk. That one act of cruelty changed everything. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe, because trust me, this is one HOA story you'll never forget. Sunlight skated off the white fences as if the neighborhood had been buffed for a real estate brochure. Marisol walked 12 paces ahead of me, cradling a brown paper bag, and the latest ultrasound printout, that little smear of ink we'd already argued over nose like mine or hers. We were mid-debate about baby names when the red blazer appeared from behind a hedge like a stop sign with lipstick. Karen Davenbrook did not ask us to pause. She did not sidestep. She rotated her body on the balls of her low heels and slid 1 foot forward, a subtle practice sweep you'd miss if you weren't looking for malice in suburbia. Marisol's toe caught the back of Karen's shoe. The bag flew. The ultrasound fluttered. The sound of my wife hitting concrete was a dull animal thud I will remember when I forget my own name. People like you don't belong in Willow Creek, Karen said, tone bright as a PTA announcement, eyes flat as parking lot tar. I was at Marisol's side in 2 strides. Training wants you to scan first, react second. Marriage flips the order. Hey, breathe for me, I said, checking for belly, tenderness orienting her to the curb. There was a scrape along her knee and an ugly blush blooming on her forearm, but her pupils were equal and reactive. Panic tunneled my vision anyway. 6 months. Still too fragile for the concrete to be anything but a threat. Karen clicked her tongue. Sidewalk etiquette must be respected. Our bylaws clearly state, not one more word I said without raising my voice. I pressed 2 fingers to my smartwatch and held for 3 seconds. The face flashed a tiny blue chevron 911 blue, our encrypted distress for undercover assets. The signal was thin, piggybacked off a utility pole repeater I'd installed during a volunteer landscaping day, but it was enough. Magnolia unit would see my location light up like a flare. A shadow fell over us. Do you want me to call 911? Mrs. Patel asked, clutching her reusable grocery tote like a shield. She'd seen 2 kids to college and could shepherd a battlefield with cinnamon rolls and pure nerve. Ambulance, please, I said. Say potential abdominal trauma. Logan, the teenage skateboarder with a mop of hair and a permanent sense of injustice, rolled up and froze. I got the whole thing, Mr. Cole, he blurted, raising his phone like he'd just filmed Bigfoot. She stuck her leg out on purpose. Karen huffed. Absolutely not. She was rushing. It's reckless to walk at that speed. At the speed of walking? I asked. Karen held up her clipboard, the same one she used to track lawn heights and fence paint chip codes. Sidewalk usage, Rule 14. C residents must maintain a safe pace conducive to human legs, I said. Yes, I read that law in kindergarten. Marisol tried to rise. I guided her back down. Stay put. EMTs are on their way. My voice was calm, but the underside of it crackled. Hundreds of hours in rooms with worse people than Karen had taught me how to shelve fury. The shelf creaked. Karen pivoted to the crowd gathering along the hydrangeas. This is a simple matter of compliance. If she had worn appropriate footwear per HOA guidelines, the appropriate footwear for carrying our baby is whatever she's wearing, I said. Back away 6 feet. She did not move. Karen never heard verbs she didn't give herself. Sirens threaded the afternoon. I used the seconds to inventory the cameras along the block. 2 doorbells, 1 porch cam, 1 HOA safety lens, mounted high on the lamppost. A vanity project Karen had pushed through the board after someone chalked a hopscotch grid on the greenway. I cataloged angles, line of sight glare. The lamppost unit would have the best view of the sweep, assuming nobody tampered. Name and phone if you're willing, I told the neighbors. They knew me as the guy who fixed printers for free and mowed the elderly couple's lawn when their son was away. The clipboard of my life, the visible one, was crowded with favors. Hands lifted. I dictated into my phone, attached the contact list to an encrypted note, and watched the sending spinner tick once, then resolve. Good. The pipe was open. The ambulance arrived with the small chaos of competence kneel glove palpate reassure. The EMT's Doppler monitor chirped a tiny galloping heartbeat rising out of static. Marisol exhaled for the first time since the fall, tears squeezing out from relief rather than pain. I wanted to fold the sound up and store it somewhere safe. Karen aimed her clipboard at the EMT like a laser sight. Be advised, Rule 7B prohibits emergency vehicles from parking with wheels on the grass. The EMT looked at me. I shook my head, not worth it. We'll take her in for a precautionary check, he said. I'm riding with her, I said, then glanced at Karen. You will provide me with a copy of the lamppost footage for the last hour. Her smile was taut somewhere between triumph and contempt. HOA security videos are private property. Only the board can authorize access. File a request and we'll consider it at our monthly meeting. In 30 days, I said. In 30 days, she echoed, sweet as bleached sugar. Great. I'll show the paramedic the ultrasound in 30 days, I said. She lifted her chin. You could also be fined for sarcasm. It's unbecoming. That almost made me laugh. I didn't. Instead, I reached for the ultrasound lying face down near the curb. The paper was smudged, the tiny profile still stubbornly ours. I slid it into my wallet. As the EMT loaded, Marisol Mr. Johnson ambled up. He had the gait of former law enforcement, a little stiffness at the hip, and a way of scanning that never died. Saw it, he murmured. If you need a statement, I will, I said, and lowered my voice further. And you didn't see me press a button, he winked. Didn't even see your watch. The doors thumped shut, the ambulance pulled away. I watched it long enough to feel the thread between us stretch taut rather than snap. Then I turned back to Karen. What you did is assault, I said evenly. And whether you meant it that way doesn't change the impact. She smirked. Impact is exactly what I'm worried about. The impact on our community standards. Since you're so keen on process, Mr. Cole, I'll issue a notice of violation for, let's see, improper bag containment, unsafe pedestrian behavior, and littering. There's plastic on the lawn. It was the ultrasound sleeve. I picked it up slowly so she could see the hands that weren't shaking. Bill me, I said. She scribbled on her form. You'll have 15 days to remit payment. Or contest, I suppose, if you enjoy wasting everyone's time. I imagined the Magnolia unit cars already drifting into the corners of our map. They'd come in as cable guys, city inspectors, maybe a landscaping truck, with a sun-faded logo and a pair of men in sunglasses arguing over sprinkler heads. They'd stitch our block into a net-fine mesh, invisible to fish, who think water is just the way life feels. While you're in a rule-writing mood, I said, add an addendum, don't trip pregnant women on sidewalks. I smiled small and humorless. You'll want it in writing for the board minutes. I walked home to grab Marisol's go bag and my cover ID. In the mirror, my face was every suburban husband frown, worry practical haircut. I clipped my badge to the inside of my jacket, a quiet gravity only I could feel, and slid a thin case the size of a candy bar into my pocket. Inside was a piercer for the lamppost junction box, and a piggyback transmitter with a chip that liked to make friends with tyrannical little networks. Back outside, the day had tilted toward late. Sprinklers whispered along the median like gossip. Karen stood on her porch phone to ear pacing lines into the welcome mat. An HOA banner drooped in a window, community is compliance. I crossed the street not to her but to the lamppost. At its base, a locked shroud disguised a maintenance port. I crouched, unscrewed the fascia, with the bland confidence of someone who belongs everywhere, and exposed the junction. 2 minutes to seat the transmitter, 30 seconds to wake it. The chip chimed in my earpiece one polite ping that meant it could see the camera brain and the tiny system-on module that Karen's nephew installed for cheap. Cheap made you sloppy. Sloppy made you ours. Magnolia, this is Echo, I said under my breath, eyes on the screws. Lamppost feed cloned. Requesting scrape of last 10 hours. All motion triggers priority tag 1. Copy Echo, a voice replied. Crisp and distant. We have you. Also receiving civilian video from multiple sources. Preliminary review supports battery by contact. We're standing up a local staging cell 2 blocks east utility easement. Keep it soft, I said. She's the face. I want the trunk. Understood. The transmitter finished its handshakes. A second ping, this one deeper, telling me it had found a sibling network bleeding out of the HOA clubhouse. A mesh of cheap cams, one password reused, like a favorite joke. I filed the map to the operation channel. It would look like veins feeding a red blazer heart. Mr. Cole, Karen's voice carried like a lifeguard whistle. "What are you doing to our lamppost?" I snapped the fascia shut and stood dusting my knees. "Filing a request," I said, and patted the aluminum pole. "Per your process, you need authorization to touch HOA property." I looked at the pole, then at her. "So do you." Her mouth worked soundlessly for a beat. I'm calling Clive. He's our legal counsel." "Your treasurer," I corrected, who once misspelled subpoena as subpoena in a newsletter. Color crept up her throat. "You're very clever, Mr. Cole. Clever tends to get fined." "That, and breathing," I said. "I'll mortgage the house." She stomped inside door, slamming with the moral conviction of a sitcom laugh track. I let the empty street settle. Across the way, Mr. Johnson lifted his chin, the tiny secret salute men share when they've both carried radios for a living. Logan rolled by again, this time slower camera still running. "You good?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. "Keep that video safe. 2 copies. Airplane mode when you're not using your phone." He blinked at the order, then nodded like I'd handed him a mission. "Yes, sir." I texted Marisol a heart the size of our whole situation and got back a picture of a hospital ceiling with a thumbs up in the corner. Beneath it, a caption, "Baby's heartbeat is strong. So am I. Don't do anything too heroic without me." The laugh came then dry and real. I typed, "Heroism is mostly paperwork." Then I slid the phone away and let the agent part of me take the wheel all the way. The sun bled down past the roofs. From somewhere behind the utility easement, a truck door thudded. If you listened hard enough, you could hear the neighborhood's rhythm change. A lawnmower cut off a beat too early, a screen door didn't quite latch, a dog barked once, and then decided better. The pond at the cul-de-sac held the last light like a secret. I took one more long look at Karen's house, the precise shrubs, the brass numbers polished to gleam, and pictured what lived under the lawn. Not ideals, not community, not rules that kept us safe. Something heavier, boxed and taped and labeled as seasonal decor. "Magnolia," I said, turning toward the clubhouse. "This is Echo. Signal received and clear. Stand by for a board meeting nobody planned on." Night slid down over Willow Creek like a lid on a jar. The kind of suburban quiet that hums sprinklers ticking porch lights, popping on in perfect symmetry, the illusion that nothing bad could ever happen here. Inside that illusion, my phone buzzed once, no name, no emoji, just a string of coordinates and 2 words. "Eyes open." That was Magnolia Unit's confirmation. They'd received my 911 blue signal, which meant I was no longer a sleeping ghost in the suburbs. I was back on the Bureau's grid. I parked my truck by the cul-de-sac gazebo, the one Karen had turned into her personal HOA office. From the outside, it was a fairy-light shack with a corkboard full of passive-aggressive flyers. "Please keep noise to a minimum. After 7 p.m., no cars. Overnight on street community. Pride equals community control." Behind that saccharine message, there was a router blinking too fast for its bandwidth. I cracked open the side panel, pretended to fix a light, and slid a fiber sniffer the size of a flash drive into the Ethernet jack. The signal spooled into my earpiece, immediately static first, then the low hum of digital traffic. HOA emails, payments, membership logs, IP addresses. Half of the outgoing data packets were rerouting through an encrypted VPN node in El Paso. Interesting. That was Douglas Davenbrook territory. 2 blocks away, I saw movement, the subtle, trained rhythm of men who belonged to a different kind of neighborhood. The FBI's covert support team had already melted into the scenery. One agent disguised as a tree-trimming contractor, another jogging with a leash attached to an empty collar, a third pretended to check water meters. I keyed my comm echo reporting. Local network infiltration achieved. Possible tunnel to border node. Copy echo came the voice of Special Agent Harlow, my handler. Calm, low, dangerous in its efficiency. Keep the cover domestic. We'll triangulate from our end. "How's your wife?" "Stable," I said. "Hospital confirmed fetal heartbeat." "She's tough. Good. Then stay that way. We'll need you lucid." I spent the next hour mapping the invisible arteries of Willow Creek: cameras, Wi-Fi, motion sensors, HOA, security drones. All of it routed through the same ISP account registered under Karen's name. That wasn't just obsessive micromanagement. That was control. Real-time visibility on everyone in the neighborhood. At 9:27 p.m., a black Escalade eased down the street with its lights off. Douglas. He always drove slow, like someone who expected the ground to move for him. The vehicle stopped at the rear gate of their property, the one marked maintenance access only. He unlocked it, backed the SUV into the yard, and the gate shut behind him. I zoomed in through the drone feed. 2 men stepped out with him, one Hispanic, one white, both wearing work boots, both carrying duffel bags heavy enough to bend their spines. Douglas opened the basement hatch. They disappeared underground. By 10 p.m., I had what I needed: timestamps, visual confirmation, thermal readings of a subsurface chamber, and a list of license plates scraped from the HOA visitor system. I cross-checked them on the Bureau's narcotics watch list. 3 hits. So the HOA's Community Beautification Fund wasn't about petunias after all. I called it in. Magnolia Base, this is Echo. I'm confirming suspected narcotics storage under Residence 14C Davenbrook Drive, requesting Federal Observation Authority. Echo authority granted. Keep it black out until we validate chain of custody, Harlow said. We'll run parallel facial rec on Douglas. You focus on Karen. Copy. I turned my lens back to her house. Through the blinds, I could see her pacing, phone in hand, wine glass half full, one hand slicing the air as she spoke. I boosted the parabolic mic. Her voice spilled through in crystalline venom. I don't care what he saw, handle it. The HOA can't take another inspection. A man's voice answered, muffled but deep. I ran it through my voice pattern database, Douglas confirmed. They'll come for the accounts, he said. You need to clean the logs. All of them. Karen, that's your mess, not mine, Douglas. You signed the papers, Karen. Every single check. She slammed the phone down so hard it rattled my mic. At 10:43 p.m., Magnolia's perimeter sensors blinked online blue arcs, tracing the neighborhood map in my augmented feed. The Bureau had moved a mobile command van into the local substation. Everything was in motion. Still, I couldn't shake the image of Marisol lying on that sidewalk, her breath ragged, the paper ultrasound crumpled in my hand. That was the real fuel behind this operation now, not just the Bureau's case file. A soft knock startled me. Mr. Johnson, the retired cop neighbor, stood there with a mug of coffee. Figured you'd still be up, he said. Didn't see you at the hospital. She's stable, I said. Thanks for earlier. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. You were too calm for a man whose wife just got hurt. That look doesn't come from yoga. I smiled faintly. Old habits. He studied me a second longer. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Karen's got friends, big ones. Not just the HOA board, I know, I said. And that's exactly why I'm planning. He left the mug on my step. Call if you need backup. Ex-cop backup, not federal. Quieter that way. At midnight, the data stream from the lamppost finally cracked open. I filtered through terabytes of mundane footage, dogs, sprinklers, joggers, until the pattern emerged. Douglas loading crates labeled garden fertilizer. Karen signing off delivery forms. Then, a week-old clip showing a van marked Community Improvement arriving at 3 a.m. The driver, one of the Bureau's flagged cartel couriers. That was the moment everything locked into place. I opened the encrypted chat. Echo proof of cartel connection confirmed. Request immediate tactical prep. Magnolia base copy. Transitioning from surveillance to containment. Maintain proximity until signal redline. Redline. That was Bureau code for an active takedown within 24 hours. By 2 a.m., the team was staged around Willow Creek under cover of night crews. SUVs parked under dead streetlights, vans labeled city utilities. To the neighbors, it looked like maintenance. To us, it was a siege waiting to breathe. I watched Karen's house through the scope feed. The upstairs light flickered off. Douglas's shadow passed once across the window, then vanished. In my earpiece, Harlow whispered, Echo, confirm line of sight. Visual confirmed, I said. Target 14, see dark. 2 occupants presumed inside. Good. Then go home. Sleep 2 hours. At dawn, we move. I hesitated. Permission to stay on site denied. You're compromised emotionally. We'll handle it. But he was wrong. I wasn't compromised. I was anchored. There's a difference. I killed the comm and stayed anyway. At 3:12 a.m., the Escalade's engine rumbled again. Douglas stepped out alone, wearing gloves, carrying a metal briefcase. He loaded it into the trunk. I adjusted the camera license plate angle clear. The plates were fake. I zoomed closer and caught a faint reflection in the rear window rows of vacuum-sealed packs inside the case. I whispered into the mic, Echo to Magnolia Base, confirming narcotics transfer attempt. 1, target mobile. Intercept in progress. Stand down, Echo, Harlow ordered. We don't have warrant time. I'm not arresting, I said. I'm following. Echo, I was already moving. I tailed Douglas 3 miles down County Road 42. No headlights, no sirens, just engine hum and the pulse of something righteous in my chest. He stopped by an abandoned storage depot, opened a side door, and rolled the briefcase inside. A black van waited there. I recognized the symbol etched on the license, a silver wolf's head. The cartel's signature. I snapped 3 photos and transmitted them. A response came back almost instantly. Echo, you just cracked the El Paso pipeline. I looked at the glowing screen wind slicing through the empty lot and thought, all this began because one woman couldn't keep her foot to herself. By the time I returned to Willow, Creek dawn was thinning the sky. The sprinklers came alive again, washing the blood from yesterday's sidewalk. Karen stood on her porch, coffee cup in hand, the picture of suburban serenity. When she saw me, she smiled small and smug. Morning, Mr. Cole. I do hope your wife learned to watch where she's going. I stared at her for a long second, then smiled back. Oh, don't worry. She's resting. You, on the other hand, might want to tidy up your yard. Karen frowned. Excuse me, I nodded toward the street. 3 city trucks were rolling in plain white engines, idling. She didn't know it yet, but every one of those vehicles carried FBI agents under fake maintenance vests. The operation had already begun. The trucks fanned out like polite sharks, orange cones, clipboards, and men in reflective vests whose boots didn't squeak like city workers. Magnolia had slipped into Willow Creek wearing the uniform of compliance. Karen's favorite. By mid-morning, flyers appeared in mailboxes. Emergency HOA meeting, 4:00 p.m., clubhouse. I didn't put them there, but I didn't need to. If you want Karen to come running, suggest control is slipping. Marisol texted me a hospital selfie 4 out, smile small but real. Heartbeat steady. I'm okay. Are you okay? I sent back a picture of the clubhouse, empty folding chairs, a crooked civility pledge poster curling off the corkboard. Working. Coming home after the meeting. Kiss the baby for me twice. She replied with a heart, then added, don't go too far. I promised I wouldn't. We both knew I probably would. I arrived early and walked the perimeter like a home inspector. The clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and suspicion. On the side wall, the HOA router blinked its frantic little Morse code. My fiber sniffer was still sipping from the line. The feed piped into the mobile command van now parked very legally behind the maintenance shed. Through my earpiece, Harlow's voice curled in echo. We're live. Your mesh gives us 4 interior mics and the projector input. Keep it theatrical. I brought a show, I said. At 3:58 p.m. the herd arrived. Neighbors shuffled and clutching reusable bottles in resentment. Mr. Johnson took a seat halfway back, arms folded, cop eyes scanning. Mrs. Patel deposited a plate of cinnamon squares on the snack table with the air of a woman who had fed 1,000 crises. Logan claimed a front-row chair phone in airplane mode like I'd told him. Then the red blazer cut the air. Karen swept to the front, with her clipboard flanked by 2 board stalwarts. Clive, the treasurer who dressed like an attorney about to be audited, and Sandy, the secretary whose smile was brittle enough to cut zip ties. Karen tapped the gavel a little too hard. Order, this emergency session is now in order. Emergency that you called someone? Muttered. Karen smiled like a dentist. Neighbors, there has been an incident involving false accusations, harassment, and potentially unlawful surveillance of HOA property. Her eyes slid to me. We will address it quickly, firmly, and with unity. She loved that word unity, so long as it meant everyone uniting under her. First, Karen continued, we must preserve decorum. I remind you of our civility pledge. She pointed to the curling poster, words matter, keep it nice. Should add, don't trip pregnant women, Mr. Johnson said, not quite quietly. Karen's smile didn't crack. Public comment at the end, Harold. She never remembered that he preferred Mr. Johnson. Clive hoisted a binder. Treasurer's report, he droned. Operating budget stable beautification fund on Schedule A, hand shot up. Is that the fund that put cameras on the lampposts to catch hopscotch chalk? Mrs. Patel asked. Security is priceless, Karen said briskly. Now then, let's talk about security, I said, standing. A light ripple moved through the room. People pivoted like flowers to Sunday, specifically the security footage from the lamppost camera that recorded the incident this morning. Karen's eyes glittered. That footage is private. Sure, I said, and nodded at Logan. He took the cue and connected his phone to the projector cable snaking under the table. We didn't need Karen's footage anymore. We had 45 neighbors' angles and my cloned feed. On the screen, the meeting room blinked away, replaced by a sunny sidewalk. There was Marisol 12 paces ahead of me, the brown bag, the ultrasound glinting, and then slow motion, the gentle, deliberate sweep of Karen's foot. Marisol's stumble, the fall me, dropping to my knees. The sound sucked out of the room like a vacuum bag catching a marble. Karen slammed the gavel. Deepfake, it has metadata, I said. Time-stamped, geotagged checksum, intact, corroborated from 4 angles. If it's a deepfake, it's the most boringly accurate forgery in history. Clive stepped forward, red blotches climbing his neck. You can't show that without board approval. I tilted my head. Clive, did you file the HOA's 990 last year? He blinked. This is irrelevant. Because the IRS would disagree, I said. Also, the State Attorney General's Charitable Trust section. But let's table your paperwork for a minute. I clicked the next clip night footage, a black Escalade reversing toward a rear gate labeled Maintenance Assesses Only. Who has a gate like that in a residential yard? Karen steadied herself with her clipboard. That is for landscaping deliveries. Fascinating landscaping, I said, and tapped the clip forward. Thermal feed, bleeding oranges and whites, heat signatures moving in the yard, then down beneath the grass. A cluster of rectangular ghosts glowing in the earth. Logan whispered, "Dude." Someone else whispered, "Jesus." Karen's voice pitched high. "You are illegally spying on a private residence. You have no authority." "About that," I said, and let my tone go flat. "My name is Ethan Cole. On paper, I'm a software engineer. In practice, I took out a small wallet and flashed the shield for a breath's worth of seconds. I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room exhaled all at once. Clive actually stepped back. Sandy's smile cracked for real this time, corners collapsing like wet meringue. Karen didn't move. Only her eyes did tiny calculations in quicksilver. "Sit down," she said, but it sounded wrong, like a GPS, insisting you turn onto a road that doesn't exist. "No," I said. "You will. In a few minutes." Ethan Harlow said softly in my ear, "Keep her talking." "Karen," I said aloud, "you and your husband Douglas have routed HOA funds through a VPN node tied to a warehouse near El Paso that's on 3 separate federal watch lists. We have video of cartel couriers using a van marked Community Improvement making 3 a.m. deliveries to your rear gate. We have a thermal signature of an underground storage room in your yard. Do you want to keep playing board games?" Lies, she spat. "All fabricated by you? You've been trying to undermine community standards since you moved in. You let dandelions grow." Mr. Johnson laughed a bark that startled even him. "Lady, he mows my yard when my hip won't let me. His lawn edges could pass a marine inspection." Sandy leaned on the table, voice thin. "Even if what you're showing is accurate, the HOA is a separate jurisdiction. Our rules supersede city code within common areas." The room wobbled like a bad camera pan. I couldn't help it. I smiled. "Did you just tell a federal agent that your newsletter outranks the United States Code?" Scattered laughter broke the spell. The spell was all Karen ever had. She lifted the clipboard like a shield. "You don't scare me. You can't storm into people's homes without a warrant. You're bluffing to intimidate me into handing over proprietary HOA data." "Warrant package is in review," Harlow murmured in my ear. "Almost there," a second voice added. "Judge is online." I paced once slowly until I was between Karen and the door. No one's storming anywhere. "We're having a meeting." Clive's phone buzzed. He glanced down, face draining. Karen saw it and misread it as support. "Clive, tell them." He didn't. His hand trembled. Everyone saw it. "Neighbors," I said, and gestured to the screen. "Look at the ledger." A spreadsheet filled the wall, line items for Beautification, Security Improvements, Community Pride. Each one split to a vendor called Davenbrook Enhancement Partners. The corporate address matched a P.O. box used by Douglas 10 years ago in a DEA file. The numbers weren't just sloppy, they were insulting. Mrs. Patel raised a hand, voice steady. "How much of our dues went into this business?" "North of 200,000, I said. Gasps floated up like birds. "And that's just what we can see without a full forensic scrub." Karen slapped the gavel again. "Irrelevant." "Irre." The clubhouse door opened. A man in a city utilities vest stepped in, nodded to the room, and bent to plug a cable into the projector cart as if he were fixing a loose connection. He wasn't. In the half-second he was near Karen, he slid a small metallic rectangle under the edge of her clipboard. A tag. He left as quickly as he came. Karen never looked down. Echo Harlow said, "Tag confirmed." "We have her device." "Copy," I breathed. Sandy fumbled for her tote bag. Karen shot her a look that said, "Not yet." My phone vibrated twice, then once warrant signed. The mobile command van's engine hummed awake outside. Through the blinds, I caught the soft movement of shadows repositioning utility workers who weren't landscapers, who weren't two joggers, who suddenly weren't sweaty anymore. Karen pointed at me with the gavel like an exorcist. "Leave this property, Mr. Cole, now, or I'll fine you for disorderly conduct. I'll ban you from the pool." Karen," I said gently, "you're under arrest." Silence. She blinked, a tiny tremor passing from the corner of her eye to the muscle along her jaw. "You don't have the..." The door opened again, this time with purpose. Blue windbreakers. FBI stepped in, badges visible. 2 more appeared at the back exit. Outside engines grew teeth. The room folded around her. "Karen Davenbrook," I said, voice formal, calm, inevitable. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to launder money, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence. You have the right to remain silent." She threw the gavel. It clattered uselessly against the projector cart and bounced to Logan's feet. "You can't do this," she hissed, grabbing the edge of the table, as if jurisdiction could be wrestled like a lawn chair. "This is my community." "No," I said, "it's theirs." Behind her, the screen switched, feeds Douglas on last night's thermal, the underground room, the van with the silver wolf's head, the ledger lines dancing with his name. Clive sagged into a chair. Sandy stared at the floor. The neighbors watched the story they'd lived in for years flip right side up. An agent cuffed Karen. She twisted once, twice. For a second, she tried the old magic look around the room, find the one who will rescue you, the one you still control. There wasn't one. Even the civility poster had peeled 2 more inches, the corner drooping like a tired eye. As the agents led her toward the door, she leaned toward me. "You think you're a hero?" she whispered. "Heroes don't live here. Rules do." I thought of Marisol's ultrasound, the little smudge of a nose we'd already argued over. I thought of sprinklers washing blood from a sidewalk that would be reported next month and called improved. I thought of how much ugliness prefers a white fence. "Then I guess we're changing the rules," I said. Outside, the late afternoon had sharpened into something bright and unforgiving. The mobile command van's side door slid open. Radios crackled. Somewhere at the edge of the block, a dog barked 3 times and then settled. Over my earpiece, Harlow search team, moving on the residence. Echo, hold the room, collect voluntary statements. We go hot on 14C and 5. I nodded to the agents escorting Karen. "Mind the step," I said. Old habit, or maybe just petty making courtesy, the last thing she heard inside her clubhouse. Logan bent to pick up the gavel. "Can I keep this?" he asked. "Evidence," I said, then softened. "But I'll get you something better. A new sign." I pointed at the curling poster. "Words matter. Keep them true." He grinned. "Can it say, 'No Karens'?" "Let's start with no Cardles," I said. The neighbors began to talk, careful at first, then louder, the sound of a cul-de-sac, remembering it belonged to people, not clipboards. Through the window blinds, I watched agents stride toward the Davenbrook home jackets, flaring boots sure. The net we'd laced all day drew tight. "Echo," Harlow said, and I could hear the smile that only shows up when paperwork becomes action. "On your mark." I looked once toward the hospital on the far side of town, where a woman who loved me had texted 2 hearts and a boundary I was breaking for both of them. I looked at the street, the fence, the lamppost that had watched all of this and would watch again when we were gone. "Magnolia," I said, voice low, steady, "execute." The night swallowed Willow Creek whole. Porch lights flickered one by one until only the Davenbrook mansion glowed at the center of the cul-de-sac, its warm light a lie stretched over something rotting. I stood across the street, phone pressed to my ear. Echo came Harlow's voice, calm but sharp. "You're cleared for interior recon. Warrant just expanded. You'll have tactical on standby within 20 minutes. "Copy," I murmured. "I'll open the door before they knock." The plan was simple: plant, the forensic sniffers confirm what we suspected, and keep the neighborhood asleep while we dismantled its queen. Simple never meant easy. I moved along the hedges, staying low. The house's alarm system, ironically, the same brand I'd helped the Bureau design 5 years ago, blinked harmlessly. A universal bypass key worked its quiet miracle. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish, chlorine, and money. The foyer gleamed. Family portraits lined the hallway, Karen and Douglas at charity events, shaking hands with people who'd later plead guilty to fraud. Everything about this house screamed self-importance, from the marble tiles to the gold plaque that read, "Community begins with leadership." I snapped a photo and sent it to the Bureau channel. "Leadership," I typed. "Confirmed ridiculous." Through my earpiece, Harlow chuckled. "Stay focused, Cole, always." The deeper I went, the stranger it got. The living room's bookshelf was filled with HOA manuals and binders labeled Compliance Reports 2018, 2024. The television displayed a paused slideshow of HOA meeting photos, each one featuring Karen mid-speech, her fingers stabbing the air like a judge sentencing the innocent. Then I saw a faint scuff mark on the wooden floor behind the couch. I knelt. The grain of the wood didn't match. It was newer, too, even. My penknife found a tiny seam. When I pried it up, the section of floor rose like a trap door, revealing a small keypad underneath. "Magnolia Base," I whispered. "We've got a substructure." Harlow's tone flattened. "Describe." "Hidden access panel." "Keypad." "Looks new." No blueprint listing. Code sweep on it. I pulled out the handheld decryptor from my jacket, lightweight bureau issued, built for locks exactly like this. The display pulsed once, twice, then beeped green. The panel slid open, revealing a metal staircase descending into the dark. I flicked on my flashlight. The beam caught on rows of plastic-wrapped crates stacked neatly beneath the floor, each stamped with the same logo, Davenbrook Enhancement Partners. Beautification fund my ass. Halfway down, my boot hit concrete. The basement wasn't a basement, it was a bunker. A full operation hub built under the HOA president's house. Rows of industrial shelves lined the walls, filled with sealed containers, vacuum-packed bags, and boxes of fertilizer that tested hot. The second my sensor sniffed, the air methylamphetamine precursor, top grade. Next to them, a server rack hummed a private financial database blinking with overseas routing numbers. I took out my camera and started recording everything. Magnolia Base, I said quietly, you're going to want a bigger truck. There was a pause, then Harlow's voice hardened. Cole, we've just intercepted chatter. The cartel knows we're in their backyard. You've got maybe 20 minutes before they realize the HOA cover is blown. Then we're right on schedule. Upstairs, a door slammed. I froze, light off, weapon drawn. Two shadows crossed above me, one male, one female. Voices. Douglas. They're coming, Karen. My contact says the Bureau's been sniffing around for weeks. Karen, you said they'd never trace it back here. You promised Douglas. Then maybe you shouldn't have assaulted a federal agent's wife, Karen hissed. How was I supposed to know she was married to? I stepped into the light. To me. They both spun. Douglas went for his jacket. I already had my Glock leveled. Don't, I warned. Karen's face drained of color. You set me up. No, I said. You set yourself up. I just pressed record. Douglas's eyes darted to the window. The low thrum of approaching engines vibrated through the floorboards. He recognized it before she did. You brought them here, he growled. Correction, I said. You brought them here. I just made the introductions. He lunged not at me, but toward a metal briefcase near the kitchen counter. I fired once into the floor just to the left of his hand. The briefcase slipped from his grasp and popped open, spilling out cash bundles wrapped in HOA stationery. Karen let out a shriek, part fury, part disbelief. You told me those were vendor payments, Douglas turned, voice low, venomous. You wanted to be important, Karen. Congratulations, you're the face of a federal indictment. I pressed my comms. Magnolia Base, suspects located. Confirm breach. Copy, Echo, Harlow said. Executing entry. Outside, the night broke open. The quiet suburban hum was drowned in a chorus of engines, boots, and bullhorns. Blue lights painted the windows. The walls shook under the weight of federal presence. Douglas ran for the back door. I followed close enough to see the panic slick his neck with sweat. He burst onto the patio, reaching for something hidden under a tarp. Another weapon, maybe, or another lie. I didn't give him the chance. Drop it, I shouted. He turned, eyes wild. You don't know what you're dealing with, Agent. Enlighten me, I said. Half the HOA presidents in this county work for us. You can't clean this up. I stepped closer. Then we'll burn it down. He fired first. The bullet slammed into the fence post, inches from my head. I dove behind a stone planter and returned fire, 2 clean shots. One caught his shoulder. He went down screaming. Agents swarmed in from the yard, shouting commands, cuffing him before the echo faded. Karen appeared at the door, trembling. Douglas, she cried. Tell them it's all a mistake. Tell them it's... He laughed, a bitter, bloody rasp. It's your HOA, sweetheart. You sign everything. 2 agents took her by the arms. She thrashed once, twice, then stopped fighting when she saw the swarm of blue jackets pouring through her garden. For the first time, the clipboard queen had nothing to hold on to. Harlow approached through the chaos face set, tablet in hand. Echo, the basement's clear. We've got product, cash, and documents, tying them to 3 cartel fronts. Beautiful work. Yeah, I said, scanning the lawn where the perfect grass was now churned with footprints. Beautiful. He caught my tone. You did your job. I did my job months ago. Tonight I made it personal. Harlow didn't argue. Personal or not, you stopped something ugly. Go home. We'll finish the sweep. I nodded, but I couldn't move yet. I watched as the evidence techs hauled out crate after crate, each labeled with the same HOA logo. Beautification Fund. A suburban empire of fear and greed hidden behind roses and bylaws. Karen screamed as they loaded her into the car. You can't do this to me. I am Willow Creek. I looked at her over the hood of a squad car. No, Karen. Willow Creek's the people you stepped on. The door slammed, silencing her. At dawn, the sun crept over the wrecked perfection of the neighborhood. Lawns still sparkled with dew, but the air was different, raw, real. Mr. Johnson stood with a cup of coffee, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see the day the HOA got raided by the feds, he muttered. You and me both, I said. He chuckled. Guess we're free now, huh? Free enough to repaint your fence whatever color you want, I said. He laughed and walked away, whistling. I took one last look at the Davenbrook house windows. Shattered garden, trampled, but finally honest. Behind me, agents packed up equipment, radios crackling with wrap-up chatter. Echo Harlow called over comms operation complete. You're clear to stand down. I exhaled. For the first time in years, the word clear actually meant something. I started toward my truck just as my phone buzzed again. A text from Marisol. Baby's kicking. Feel strong. Come home. I smiled, started the engine and drove away from the ruins of Karen's empire, the last echoes of sirens chasing me into the sunrise. Dawn arrived thin and pale, as if the sun refused to intrude on the chaos it had helped light. Willow Creek wore its morning like a bruise, perfect lawns now trampled, white fences scuffed, the clubhouse doors still ajar, breathing out the last of the night's secrets. The cul-de-sac smelled like smoke from a neighbor's barbecue and the metallic tang of adrenaline. By the time I finally loosened the tension in my shoulders, the scene had the precise order of a war staged by people who hate disorder. Agents moved with that economy of motion you only see in trained professions, no wasted steps, no dramatic poses. Technicians rolled in towers of gear, tagging boxes, vacuuming prints from coffee mugs, bottling air, and darkening the light on screens so nothing contaminated the chain of custody. Evidence techs wore gloves so bright they looked ceremonial. It was all very procedural, very efficient, like surgery. Karen sat in the back of the squad car with her wrists cuffed in front. She had transitioned from enraged monarch to an animal that had lost its den. Her hair was a ragged halo, her makeup smudged. When she caught my eye, she mouthed something that looked like, "You'll regret this," but the words had no teeth left. They let me stand with the lead tactical for a minute while they cleared the property. I watched them haul crates out of the basement, long black crates sealed with industrial tape, each labeled with the Davenbrook Enhancement Partners logo. Every crate that came into sunlight revealed stacks of vacuum-sealed packages that reflected the morning like bad weather. The forensic chemtechs swabbed, tested, and nodded. Their faces did not change when the sensors spit out confirmatory readings. Methamphetamine, pills, cash bundled and banded with HOA letterhead. Someone from the narcotics squad yelled from the backyard, and I turned to see Douglas on a gurney mouth, bleeding shoulder-wrapped hands cuffed behind him. He'd tried to bolt. He'd gone for the briefcase. The angle he'd chosen to run had not been kind. They loaded him into an armored van and zipped its door shut like a mausoleum sealing a secret. The neighbors gathered slow and cautious, drawn by curiosity, but blocked by the thin green line of cones and crime scene tape. Mrs. Patel watched through binoculars wrapped in an oven mitt. Harold Mr. Johnson leaned on the mailbox and held his paper like a shield. People whispered names they'd not dared swap in the grocery aisle cartel, laundering indictments as if reading them aloud made them less cold. The press caravan arrived mid-morning, a ribbon of antennas and eager faces and microphones held out by men and women who called this sort of thing news. Harlow shot me a look that managed to smile without being indulgent. "Go get coffee," he mouthed, and the way he said it meant, "Get some distance and come back with a plan." But there was no going far. The morning had already become a list of tasks that needed hand statements, to collect neighbors, to interview armored trucks, to watch while they loaded property that had been used as currency. The Bureau wanted voluntary statements while everything was still fresh. That meant me, Mr. Johnson, Logan, Mrs. Patel, and a dozen others who had been at the clubhouse. I moved among them like a conductor who had learned to be gentle with percussion. People cried, people clutched at hands, people tried to fold their lives back together around a new hole where trust used to sit. At noon, they read Miranda to Karen again, this time with more formality. She tried to spin a story about being duped, Douglas doing it behind her back. The checks she signed were routine. She didn't look at numbers. She trusted him. The story had holes, though, the signatures on the ledgers, the emails with her name approving payments, the voice memos where she told a vendor to expedite the shipment because the garden committee wanted faster delivery. People who build empires out of little cruelties rarely forget to cash the checks. Douglas finally spoke while the cameras had not yet set up under a tarp of flapping police radios. He gave up the map. He had been a courier's courier, a man who played middle management of a distribution network and learned how to hide a server under a lawn. His voice was flat when he said names, warehouses, shell companies, offshore accounts, payoffs made in cash, and returned as donations. I watched his chest rise and fall like a bellows. The man had been careful. He had not been careful enough. I thought we were untouchable, he muttered through clenched teeth. You weren't, Harlow said, standing nearby. You were sloppy. You used the place you ruled. He glanced at me. And you put your wife on the step of it. Something in Douglas cracked then. He spoke like a man who had kept things tidy in his head and watched the pile tilt. He named the suppliers, the drop points, and a list of accounts where the HOA beautification fund had been laundered. Names that would later populate the affidavits and indictments that tipped the scale from rumor to law. All day, the Bureau ran the evidence through machines that sounded like whales, calling servers, crunching spreadsheets, software, comparing handwriting accounts, reconciling across time zones. My job was to shepherd the human side of the operation, keep witnesses steady, secure neighbor statements, ensure nothing leaked that could jeopardize the warrants. It was a lot of small kindnesses, stacked together, offering bottled water, finding a blanket for an elderly neighbor whose hands trembled sitting with Logan as he watched two men take the gavel he'd once begged to keep. Late in the afternoon, a deputy from the county sheriff's department cornered me with a concern that didn't surprise me. You expect any pushback? People who do this, they don't like losing product. His tone implied retaliation, burned cars, threats, anonymous notes, but his eyes asked if we knew enough to stop it. We minimized that risk, I told him. We staged the operation tight. We had intercepts on their mobile nodes. If anything comes, it will be a belly flutter, not an explosion. I lied a little. Plans are only as good as the people executing them. Still, the containment held. No trucks backed into the street with revenge in their taillights. No masked men appeared on porches. By evening, the bulk of the physical evidence had been cataloged and loaded onto armored trucks. Agents took Karen in for a federal arraignment. Douglas rode to a secure facility to be booked on charges that will follow him for a long time. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen by court order. The board's minutes, once the funniest thing in town for their petty zeal, were now documents of interest for prosecutors. The community that had prided itself on order discovered that order had been a thin veneer for complicity. At home that night, Marisol met me at the door with a smile that was more candle than sunrise. She smelled like antiseptic and hospital coffee. She had the look new parents get when terror folds itself into gratitude and leaves a very small, fierce joy behind. She hugged me without fuss, as if we were finally allowed to stop pretending everything was fine. How did it go? She asked, practical and exhausted. Done, I said. We pulled the threads. They were worse than we thought. She traced the faint bruise at the edge of her temple where Karen's shoe had made an ugly impression. I told you not to go too far. You tell me that every time I put on a shirt, I answered, and she laughed short, a sound like a safety latch releasing. We sat on the couch, the television off, and listened to the house breathe in and out. Outside, a neighbor played with a baby, the kind of ordinary noise that meant fragile things keep happening. Before sleep, I scrolled through the day's reports on my phone. There was a pile of names flagged for follow-up, a spreadsheet that would translate into wiretaps and subpoenas, and a dozen civilians who would have to testify. I sent an encrypted note to Harlow, all evidence staged. HOA dissolution petition seems likely. Community response looks salvageable. He replied with a single word, good. In bed, I woke to the phantom sensation of my watch buzzing the 911 blue like a ghost tugging at my sleeve. The world outside had changed in visible ways, but the antenna of my life would forever be tuned for the next flicker that meant danger. I wrapped my hand around Marisol's shoulder and felt the steady little kicks that would mark the baby's impatience like Morse code. Those small thuds were the new signals that mattered more than any tactical readout. We had won this fight, but winning, I thought, as sleep pulled me down, is often the start of a chain reaction. Arrests spawn investigations. Investigations spawn indictments. Indictments spawn trials. And trials could, if we weren't careful, bring out the very forces we had just unmasked. I slept with one eye open and kept the other on the rhythm of promises I'd made both to the Bureau and to the tiny life inside Marisol. Outside, the cul-de-sac settled into a wary hush, as if it too were catching its breath after being run through a story it hadn't asked for. They brought Douglas into the interview room like you bring in a storm, loud, messy, and full of things that could break if handled wrong. The fluorescent lights made the sweat on his brow look like a map. He sat across from me at the metal table, cuff marks still raw on his wrists, and I watched the man who'd kept his world tidy start to unpick. You gonna talk? I asked plain, as pouring coffee. He laughed once, brittle. You think I'm the guy you lock up? I'm middle management. I hand boxes to people. I don't get names. I don't get faces. You get the receipts, I said. You get the ledgers. You sign the checks. You took money from residents who trusted you to keep their park benches painted and gave it to men who sell poison. That's not middle management. That's the ledger for a crime family. He looked at me like he couldn't believe he'd been seen. Maybe he hadn't believed it either. We had an arrangement. It was simple. They brought product. We staged deliveries. They paid us cash. We issued invoices. People at county procurement thought we were a landscaping supplier. Karen did the rest. She knew the forms. She stamped them. She sent the newsletters. She made the neighbors feel safe, so she knew I asked. Douglas shrugged, and for the first time he looked small. She knew enough. She knew she was signing things. She knew money came in. She liked the control. She liked the respect. She thought the payments were donations to the beautification fund. She thought she was important. Important enough to trip a pregnant woman on the sidewalk. I said the question, a stone I lobbed but didn't expect to skip. He looked down and his mouth moved like he was tasting words. She wanted fear. Fear keeps people obedient. You step out of line, you get a violation, you get a fine, you get ostracized. It's the slow work of discipline. She never asked for blood, Ethan. She asked for order. You signed documents that hid cash inflows meant to pay cartel suppliers, I said. You wired money to shell companies and made invoices look like landscaping. You routed funds through HOA accounts. That's not ignorance. That's a ledger that pretends to be civic service. He breathed out. The breath seemed to carry more than air. We thought the front was clean. The HOA was perfect for it, people who won't ask questions because they think order is safety. We used that to launder kilos. It was routine. Until you. Until me, I asked. Until your wife got tripped, he said, and the words landed like a knock you can't pretend you didn't hear. That put a face onto the neighborhood. Suddenly it wasn't abstract, a number, a count, an invoice. It was a human. It triggered someone higher up to move the timeline. They wanted clean, probable cause. They wanted a moment that made a judge look then sign. They wanted a pretext. Your wife gave it to them whether you liked it or not. There's a particular kind of anger that lives in rooms where confessions happen. It's not hot. It's sharp. I felt it not for Douglas alone, but for the slow economy of cruelty Karen had crafted. For the way small rules had become a factory line for bigger crimes. Why use an HOA? I asked softer now. Why hide under bylaws and newsletters? Douglas's voice was small. Because no one thinks the quiet people are doing the loud things. They see rules, not red flags. We found comfort in boring paperwork and polite meetings. Nobody expects violence from someone who chairs a potluck. That's how we hid. He named names over the next hour in a way that narrowed the map of what we'd uncovered. 3 shell companies, a courier network, an offshore account she and he'd used to move cash into escrow, and 2 county officials who'd turned a blind eye to timely donations. He rattled off addresses, dates, times. He told us about the van with the silver wolf that made runs to an El Paso depot, about the PO. Boxes used to receive vendor invoices, about the metal crates that smelled like fertilizer, but tested positive for chemicals no backyard needs. When he told us how Karen had first been approached, how a man with a polite handshake and a leathery smile had talked about community improvement and funding gaps, the story stopped being about greed and started being about ordinary vanity. Weaponized. Karen wanted to be admired. Admiration was a currency. She accepted it, and the cost was other people's safety. At some point, Douglas's voice began to crack. They told me not to get attached, he said. They told me this is business. But then you live with lists and faces, and suddenly business is people with playgrounds. You get sloppy. We recorded every syllable. Every confession is a hinge on which cases swing. His admission, cooperative, bitter, and full of the sort of remorse born of being caught, began to unspool the network. Agents nodded, took notes, and fed leads into databases that would over the next months make subpoenas rain like legal cold. When the interview ended, they offered him a deal: cooperation for reduced sentencing, full disclosure for federal leniency. He signed shaking because without his cooperation, his life would be a parade of charges that would leave no mattress unturned. He agreed to lead us to the remaining nodes, contacts in border cities, and laundering accounts overseas. What he gave us was a map we could follow, the kind of thing prosecutors like to see pinned on a corkboard with red thread. Outside, the neighborhood was changing in ways you could see. The news vans had multiplied. People craned necks from behind curtains. There were placards popped up on lawns, some demanding justice, others saying nothing but the name of a local council candidate. Willow Creek discovered it had an appetite for gossip as primal as hunger. I walked the cul-de-sac after the interview past the Davenbrook house, now ringed with yellow tape and notices. The quiet people looked like different creatures in daylight, exhausted, stunned, or oddly relieved. Mrs. Patel waved me over and handed me a thermos. For the long nights, she said. Her eyes were red. You brought a storm into our street, Mr. Cole. No, I said. We pulled the curtain down. She nodded, understanding the distinction. Same difference to me. The press called it a scandal that afternoon, and headlines do what headlines do, flatten nuance into something the size of a meme. But the important things kept running: the court filings, the freezing of accounts, the appointment of a court receiver for the HOA's funds, and the slow bureaucratic machinery that will convert evidence into indictments. Legal wheels grind slow but heavy. I like that. They also grind true. That evening, in a small room reserved for victims to make statements, Marisol sat with a lawyer and wrote a statement that read like a simple ledger: 1 assault, 1 fall, 1 ultrasound. She signed it with the same meticulousness she used to balance our checkbook. Her hand trembled not from fear but from being the one who had been the fulcrum of so many lives. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "We did the right thing." We did, I thought. We had pulled a monster out from under a lawn and into the light. We had turned an HOA's rulebook into a public record, forced a system of small violences into accountability. But confessions are a beginning, not a finish. There were other men and women named in Douglas's words who would need to sleep without fear of collateral revenge. There would be trials and threats could follow. There would be families tied to the cartel who would feel the ripple and strike back. That night, as I sat on our couch with Marisol's head on my shoulder, the baby kicked strong and insistent like a fist. I pressed my palm to her belly and felt the answer. It was a small, stubborn life pushing out at the world, ignorant of politics and perfect in its demand to be safe. "Next steps," I said quietly into the dim room. She looked up, tired but fierce. "You rest. Let them do their paperwork. Then we build a life where our kid can skate on the sidewalk without being tripped." I smiled because that was the dream, and sometimes dreams start with a single law passed, a single bulletin board cleared. The confession would stand up in court, Douglas would deliver more names, indictments would follow, and the people of Willow Creek would find new ways to be neighbors. We slept with the blinds open and the porch lights unlit, because for the first time in a long time I trusted that the next knock at the door would no longer be a threat, but maybe just someone asking to borrow a cup of sugar. A year can rearrange a neighborhood in ways you don't notice day to day, until one afternoon you drive down the street and realize the flags are different, the lawns are less manicured, and people actually stop to talk to one another without glancing at their timetables. Willow Creek felt like that kind of change, slow, stubborn, the work of many small hands instead of one clipboard. The Davenbrook estate sat like a bruise on the cul-de-sac, cleaned out and condemned a notice tacked to the front gate that made the brass mailbox look ridiculous. The federal seizure sticker was bright and official. The brass gleamed with a dullness that said someone had already auctioned the best of the silverware. Karen and Douglas were wrapped in court schedules and booked hotel rooms in custody blocks you only get to think about on television. Their names would appear in indictments and pleas, in pieces that would be argued in rooms with wood paneling and gavel teeth. But justice, as we all know, is not a single moment. It's a series of ledger entries, legal filings, and a patient accounting of every lie. It's follow-up teams making sure every shell company is traced and every offshore transfer clawed back. The Bureau did that work, the long, unglamorous work, and I sat through deposition after deposition, statement after statement, while Marisol came with me when she could and rested when she couldn't. We watched the legal machinery inch the neighborhood into something accountable. What surprised me most wasn't the prosecutions, it was how the community reacted afterward. People who'd been bowing to Karen's bylaws started painting fences ridiculous colors, because suddenly it felt optional. Mr. Johnson had his mailbox painted a duck-egg blue that offended exactly no one and delighted a dozen. A group of teenagers turned the now unmonitored greenway into a Saturday afternoon parkour course, spray paint artistry included. These were small acts of reclamation, a shovel in the ground, a paint roller across a post, laughter in the cul-de-sac. It wasn't anarchic, it was people being allowed to be human again. The HOA itself dissolved under court order. A temporary receivership handled the funds, returning what could be returned, auditing what could be audited, and partitioning the remainder into forensic accounts until the courts decided. The newsletters that used to demand compliance became a volunteer list for neighborhood watches and plant swaps. We created a new charter, but this time it wasn't driven by one person's taste. It was written with input from the folks who lived there: tradespeople, retirees, teenage parents, people who just wanted to be left alone. Transparency clauses were mandatory. Financial oversight was no longer a rumor. It was a policy with teeth. On the morning the new board hung a sign by the community garden, "Willow Creek Community First." I went out and planted a magnolia where Marisol had fallen that day. It was a small tree, sapling stubborn, but it's the sort of thing that grows into something reliable. I dug with my hands, the soil breaking around me like the rest of the story had, and put the tree into the hole. Marisol stood beside me, her hand in mine, and our son Logan, because we liked that the name belonged to the kid with the skateboard. Who'd filmed the incident ran circles around us, a blur of knees and a grin that brightened the whole block. Neighbors drifted over with shovels and cider, and Mr. Johnson delivered a long, serious Today speech that included the words accountability, forgiveness, and boundaries. He said we were a neighborhood that would no longer let rules hide cruelty, and everyone clapped like it was a town meeting in an old movie. Karen's face was not on any sign. It didn't need to be. We were choosing the story we wanted to tell about ourselves. I kept my FBI credentials in the drawer where they had been when this all began. No one needed to know which nights I sat up reading depositions and which ones I was just a dad tucking a kid into pajamas. Sometimes I would catch Marisol watching me watch the neighborhood, and she would raise one shoulder at me in a small gesture that meant both of us. You did this, but we did this together. There was a moment a few months later during a neighborhood potluck when Sandy Karen's once smiling secretary came up and offered me a bag of cookies wrapped in wax paper. Her hands trembled slightly. I didn't know, she said. I thought we were helping the community. I thought she stopped embarrassed by her own gullibility. You didn't know the full story, I said. A lot of people didn't. That's why we need processes that don't depend on a single person being honest. I took a cookie. You can help now. She nodded, and then for the first time since the lamppost transmitter woke up that night, she looked like someone who could look up and not fear being shushed. There were trials, of course. The papers liked the theatrics. Journalists sat on porches and followed subpoenas like they were serialized TV. I sat in the gallery for some of the hearings, scribbled notes, listened to witnesses, watched Douglas stand with that small, angry resignation of a man who had eaten his own hubris. When the verdicts finally came down, the sentences were heavy enough to send a message but measured for the complicated human architecture involved. After the legal dust settled, life in Willow Creek settled into a new rhythm that felt less artificial. People traded tools instead of subpoenas. Meetings included refreshments and actual listening. The lamppost cameras were repurposed into a community art project. Kids painted the housings with murals of birds. The community agreed to transparent logs of donations and invoices available online for any resident to see. I volunteered to give a talk on digital hygiene, how reused passwords become doors for people with bad intentions, how small conveniences make big vulnerabilities. Those conversations were dull in the headlines, but vital in the long run. When I think back, the pivot was never a single arrest or a single confession. It was a sequence of small, steady acts, neighbors saving Logan's footage, a retired cop making a carefully worded statement, a woman bringing cinnamon squares to a meeting that became an evidence session, an agent deciding that one small signal was worth risking a storm. It was community being stronger than fear. It was people choosing one another. I still wear the watch on occasion that can signal Magnolia when things get dark, but mostly it collects dust. My active badge sits in its folder. My desk has a different nameplate now, Ethan Cole, father, neighbor, sometimes an agent. I like the balance. I like that when my son trips on a sidewalk now, it's because he misjudged a curb, not because someone decided he didn't belong. So what's the lesson? It's messy and practical rules are tools, not rulers. Structure becomes oppressive when power concentrates without oversight. And courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's turning your phone to airplane mode and saving the footage, or making a cup of coffee for a neighbor who watched a raid, or signing a petition to dissolve an HOA. It's also knowing when to call in help, legal, federal, or otherwise, because some problems require more than one person to fix. If you've ever been silenced by a petty tyrant in your neighborhood, I want you to know this. Collect the evidence, gather your neighbors, and find someone who will listen. Systems can protect us when we use them. And if you've ever thought the rules were the point, maybe they were until someone turned them into a ledger for crime, then the point becomes undoing that ledger. Tell me, what would you do if someone crossed the line in your neighborhood? Drop a comment below, share where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories where the little guys stand up to the big clipboards. We're just getting started.